every part of the assumption that the prosperity of society is the accumulation of wealth is wrong for two reasons. The first reason is prosperity of society is based on the vibrance, abundance of nature. And the minute we start destroying the earth, we are destroying the prosperity of, in my view, 75% of humanity. Most of Africa, most of Latin America, most of Asia, and I would say all of the human citizens, because ultimately they depend on nature for their air, for their water, for their food, for their identity. But the second reason it's wrong is because accumulation of wealth in the hands of 5 billionaires who control half the wealth of the world is at the cost of taking away prosperity of ordinary people. Otherwise, you wouldn't be having protests on the streets of India right now. You wouldn't be having protests every day on the streets of France. You wouldn't be having protests in England. You wouldn't be having protests in Chile. You wouldn't be having protests in Lebanon. You wouldn't be having the level of protests everywhere if people were feeling they have prospered under neoliberal policies of taking away from society. What is neoliberalism? Two elements. Deregulate commerce, allow money to be made at any cost, and austerity and structural adjustment, make the people pay for these projects of accumulation of wealth by the billionaires. Just like the chemicals came from the war, even the measure of economic prosperity as growth comes from the war. The word GDP and GNP, the gross domestic product and gross national product, are inventions of the war to mobilize resources for the war by taking away resources from people. It's in the definition of growth to rob society to finance militarization. Should have ended when the wars ended, but they've made it permanent, as a result of which we get dispossession of people on a very large scale and the division and polarization of society between the 1% and the 99%. But most seriously, as I say in my book, Oneness versus 1%, the new styles of accumulation are actually a return to the old brute colonization as the womb of contemporary capitalism. It is about invaders defining an area as their territory and colony by force and violence, and then saying, and you, the original people, will pay us rents. So we go rich sitting in London, we go rich sitting in France, we go rich sitting in Brussels, we go rich sitting in Amsterdam. We do no work, but we collect rents by creating colonies of rent collection. And if you look at the world today, if you look at the top 10 billionaires about whom I've talked in the book, beginning with Bill Gates, but the likes of the Mark Zuckerbergs. How did these 10 billionaires become so rich? Because in effect, they're doing the same as what Columbus did, the same as what the East India Company that was created to colonize India did. Take our land, colonize it, and collect lagan, which is the tax, from the people whose common property it was in the first place. So if you think of patents on seed, which is what started me on the Navdanya journey, it's a new form of lagan, it's a new form of tax on seed, on life. Life renews. The seed will give birth to seed. And you want to say, no seed, you will take my permission to renew? I will coerce you too, not just society. I call this bioimperialism. So growth is not just an illusion. Illusions just make you behave stupidly. But these illusions are born of two violent projects, colonialism and Hitler's extermination camps. They're based on ecocide and genocide. And that's why it's not an accident today that ecocide and genocide are what are destroying the world. The sad thing is the people who fight ecocide are a different community. The people who fight human rights, for human rights, are a different community. But it's when we return to the earth, we realize it's one right. The rights of the earth and the rights of people are one right.